People are told from childhood that the ultimate reward in life is to have a clear conscience. It's sleep peacefully at night, knowing you've done no wrong. Philosophers, priests, and moral teachers all preach that inner purity is the highest good. Yet Machiavelli would smirk at this advice, for he knew that those who strive for spotless hands often bind themselves in invisible chains. The man obsessed with innocence will hesitate, will falter, and will refuse to act when action demands ruthlessness. In his desperate attempt to be free of guilt, he enslaves himself to hesitation. And hesitation, in the arena of power, is death. The clear conscience, so often celebrated, becomes not a crown of virtue, but a prison of weakness. 1. Power demands dirty hands. Machiavelli understood a truth that most men fear to admit. Greatness is never achieved with clean hands. Every founder of a state, every general who reshaped the world, every ruler who carved his name into history carried blood on his hands. Romulus murdered his brother to seize the throne of Rome. Julius Caesar turned against his closest allies and brought down the very republic he once served. Alexander the Great crushed entire cities without remorse in order to secure his empire. These men were not remembered because they were pure. They were remembered because they triumphed. History, brutal and unforgiving, does not care for innocence. It reserves its honor for the ones who had the courage to do what others would not. The man who insists on keeping his conscience spotless will never rise beyond mediocrity. He will avoid hard decisions, hesitating at the very moment when boldness is required. He will refuse to cut down rivals, thinking that cruelty is beneath him, all while those same rivals plot his destruction. He will spend sleepless nights asking himself, "Is this right? Will this offend others? Will I be judged?" But the powerful man asks a very different question. Will this secure my position and guarantee my survival? That question, not morality, determines whether he lives to fight another day. In politics, in war, in leadership, the refusal to act because of conscience is not a virtue, it is a death sentence. To believe that one can rise to great heights without descending into moral compromise is to believe in fantasy, not reality. The world is not a fair arena where virtue alone earns reward. It is a battlefield where hesitation is punished, where enemies test your resolve, and where survival itself often demands actions that others will call cruel. The weak man tries to avoid the stain of guilt, and in doing so becomes powerless. The strong man accepts that his hands must be dirtied and understands that what matters in the end is not how he looks in the moment, but whether he secures the crown. The lesson is simple. Power always demands dirty hands. 2. The trap of moral hesitation. Hesitation is the silent assassin of ambition. Machiavelli saw that conscience, far from being a noble guide, is often the very thing that paralyzes men when action is most urgent. The man who clings to a clear conscience begins to debate endlessly with himself before making a move. What will others think of me? Will I be judged as cruel or unjust? Will I be remembered as a villain? In the time he wastes on such questions, opportunities evaporate, rivals grow stronger, and enemies strike first. He mistakes indecision for morality, when in truth it is only weakness disguised as virtue. The cruel irony is that his refusal to act for fear of guilt often causes far greater harm than the action itself would have.
History is littered with examples of men destroyed, not because they lacked strength, but because they lacked resolve. They hesitated at the critical hour, waiting for perfect certainty before taking a step, and in their delay, they lost everything. Machiavelli warned that fortune favors the bold, not the hesitant. The bold man understands that hesitation is far more dangerous than a questionable decision. Even a flawed action can be corrected, redirected, or spun to one's advantage. But hesitation cannot be undone. Once the moment has passed, no justification, no excuse, and no moral purity will bring it back. The man obsessed with guilt becomes his own jailer. His conscience whispers endlessly, telling him not to betray, not to deceive, not to strike. But while he is wrestling with these inner voices, his enemies are free of such burdens. They move swiftly, seize what is available, and take advantage of his hesitation. When the dust settles, it is not his innocence that protects him. It is his weakness that destroys him. This is why Machiavelli insisted that conscience, when allowed to dictate action, is not a shield but a trap. To survive and to rise, one must learn that hesitation is the real sin, and decisive action, no matter how morally uncomfortable, is the only true virtue in the pursuit of power. 3. The morality of appearances. Machiavelli shattered the illusion that true virtue is necessary for power. He argued that what matters in politics, in leadership, and in survival is not what a man is, but what he appears to be. The people do not see into your soul, they see only what you show them. A ruler may be ruthless in private, cunning in his calculations, and merciless in dealing with rivals. Yet if he appears just, compassionate, and principled in public, he will be adored. The masses hunger for symbols, not substance. They want to believe in goodness, even if it is nothing more than a mask. Thus, the wise man understands that morality is not a chain to bind him, but a costume to be worn when convenient. The man obsessed with a clear conscience misses this crucial point. He strives to actually be virtuous in every decision, sacrificing advantage for the illusion of innocence. But this is naive, for he gains no real benefit from his purity. The people will not remember the invisible struggles of his soul. They will remember only his failures. Worse, the ruthless man who wears the mask of virtue will outshine him. He will betray, deceive, and conquer, and yet be praised as just and honorable, because he knows how to act the part. In the theater of power, appearance is reality, and morality is judged not by deeds, but by perception. Consider the rulers of history who mastered this art. Caesar was ruthless in consolidating his control, yet presented himself as a savior of Rome. Napoleon crowned himself emperor, a bold act of domination, yet cloaked it in the language of destiny and national glory. Even modern leaders understand this principle. They commit acts in secret that would scandalize their people, yet they smile, shake hands, and speak of justice in public. The lesson is timeless. Those who appear virtuous command loyalty, while those who are merely virtuous are forgotten. The man who insists on being innocent imprisons himself. The man who knows how to appear innocent while acting ruthlessly becomes untouchable.
4. The prison of self-punishment. The greatest cruelty of conscience is not what it withholds from a man in action, but what it inflicts upon him afterward. Those who cling to a spotless soul become prisoners of their own thoughts. They replay every choice in their minds, tormenting themselves with what-ifs and should-haves. They demand perfection from themselves in a world where perfection does not exist. This endless cycle of guilt and self-criticism becomes a form of self-punishment, a private dungeon where the man locks himself away, whipping his spirit for sins real or imagined. While others move forward, he remains chained to the past, gnawed at by regrets that serve no purpose but to weaken his will. Machiavelli would see this for what it truly is, weakness disguised as morality. For the man who punishes himself in this way wastes energy that should be spent on securing his future. He cannot act boldly because he fears he will later be haunted by guilt. He cannot seize opportunities because he imagines the ghosts of his victims will follow him. His conscience becomes a parasite, feeding on his strength, draining him of the very resolve that power requires. He is like a ruler who builds his own prison and guards the gates himself, too noble to escape, but too broken to reign. The man who discards conscience, however, is free. He may carry scars from the past, but he does not allow them to bind him. He measures his actions not by some imagined standard of purity, but by whether they secured his position and preserved his survival. He understands that regret is useless once the deed is done, and so he wastes no time indulging in it. If a choice brought him victory, he accepts it. If a choice brought him danger, he learns from it. But never does he cripple himself with remorse. In this way, the ruthless man has an advantage over the virtuous one. While the virtuous rot in the prison of self-punishment, the ruthless sharpen their blades and prepare for the next conquest. 5. Guilt as a weapon of control. Conscience is not merely a personal burden, it is a political weapon. From the earliest civilizations, rulers, priests, and lawmakers discovered that guilt was the most effective chain ever forged. Iron shackles can be broken, prisons can be escaped, armies can be resisted, but a guilty mind enslaves itself. By teaching men that ambition is sinful, that disobedience is shameful, and that questioning authority is a moral failing, the powerful ensured that the masses would police themselves without need of constant force. A man who fears his own conscience requires no guards to watch him. He becomes his own warden, enforcing his own captivity. This is why societies endlessly preach about innocence, purity, and moral obedience, not to free men, but to keep them docile. The man who desires to rise above the herd must see through this deception. He must recognize that guilt is the tool by which the weak are kept weak. To follow conscience blindly is not virtue, but submission. It is to accept the invisible leash that others have fastened around your neck. Machiavelli would remind us that true rulers cannot be governed by the same rules as the governed. The laws of morality that keep the people orderly and obedient cannot bind the man who would rule them, for if he accepts the same chains, he joins them in slavery. The prince must step outside this system, refusing to let guilt dictate his choices, for guilt is the very poison designed to weaken him.
Yet the irony is that while the powerful must cast off guilt, they can use it masterfully against others. By invoking morality, by accusing rivals of cruelty or corruption, by stirring the masses with words of righteousness, a cunning ruler can bind his enemies with the very chains he himself refuses to wear. He manipulates the conscience of others while discarding his own, and in doing so, he multiplies his advantage. The weak, paralyzed by shame, hesitate to strike back. The strong, free from such illusions, strike boldly, and then cover their deeds with the language of justice. In this way, guilt becomes not a prison for the powerful, but a weapon wielded by them against those who still live within its walls. 6. The necessity of selective cruelty. Machiavelli taught a lesson that unsettles the gentle and terrifies the naive. Cruelty, when used with calculation, is not only necessary but often merciful. A ruler who refuses to dirty his hands, who insists on remaining pure and innocent, is not protecting his people, he is abandoning them to chaos. Disorder spreads when authority is too timid to act decisively. The harsh truth is that sometimes one execution prevents 100 rebellions, one betrayal secures an entire kingdom, one act of brutality spares a nation from years of civil war. What looks like cruelty in the moment may in fact be the only true act of compassion, for it ends uncertainty and establishes stability. The weak man, trapped by conscience, cannot see this. He fears the stain of guilt more than he fears the collapse of order. He hesitates to punish traitors, to silence agitators, or to strike his rivals, imagining that mercy will win him loyalty. But such hesitation is not mercy, it is negligence. It allows conspiracies to grow, discontent to spread, and enemies to gather strength. When blood is finally shed, it is far greater than what might have been required if he had acted swiftly. His refusal to employ cruelty when necessary is what brings far greater cruelty in the end. Thus, the conscience that demands he remain innocent becomes the very source of destruction. The wise ruler, by contrast, does not fear cruelty, he fears disorder. He uses punishment sparingly, but with precision. When discipline is needed, he does not hesitate. When betrayal is uncovered, he does not forgive. When rebellion brews, he cuts it off at the root. His cruelty is not random, nor is it sadistic. It is calculated, purposeful, and final. Once it is done, peace follows. And the people, though they may whisper about his severity, enjoy the stability that his actions preserved. Machiavelli would insist that this is the true morality of leadership, not the coward's pursuit of innocence, but the ruler's courage to act decisively, even when others call it cruel. 7. History absolves the victorious. What is guilt but a fleeting shadow? A man may be condemned in the present for the harshness of his deeds, yet, if he triumphs, his name is remembered with reverence. Machiavelli understood that history is written not by the pure, but by the victorious. The crimes of the strong are transformed into necessity, and their ruthlessness is reframed as vision. Romulus killed his own brother, yet Rome hailed him as its divine founder. Julius Caesar shattered the Roman Republic, betraying allies and laws alike, yet the world remembers him not as a traitor, but as a god. Alexander razed entire cities to ash, yet the title the world gave him was not Butcher, but the Great.
This is the true power of victory. It rewrites morality. Those who win are not judged by the rules of ordinary men. They set the rules themselves. Their cruelty becomes justice. Their betrayal becomes strategy. Their ambition becomes destiny. Meanwhile, those who fall, no matter how noble or innocent, are condemned by history as fools, tyrants, or failures. Their virtues are forgotten, their purity mocked, their names cursed. The difference between glory and disgrace is not conscience, but success. For this reason, the man who shackles himself with guilt is doomed. He believes that preserving innocence will preserve honor, yet honor flows only to the strong. It is better to bear the scars of necessary crimes and stand as a victor than to keep one's hands clean and sink into obscurity. The world does not remember the innocent. It remembers the conquerors, the rulers, the founders, the men who had the courage to act despite guilt. In the end, history absolves all sins, so long as you do not lose. 8. The mask of virtue. Machiavelli did not dismiss morality altogether. He understood its immense power as a performance. He wrote that it is not necessary for a ruler to truly possess virtues such as mercy, generosity, or faithfulness, but it is absolutely necessary that he appear to possess them. People judge with their eyes, not with their hearts. They cannot see into the inner chambers of a prince's mind. They can only observe the gestures, the speeches, and the image he projects. Thus, the wise ruler wears morality as a mask. He speaks of justice while plotting vengeance, preaches mercy while sharpening the blade, promises loyalty while preparing betrayal. To the crowd, he looks righteous. To his enemies, he remains ruthless. The mask is what keeps the people loyal, while the hidden face is what keeps him alive. The man who insists on being truly virtuous in every act, by contrast, makes himself vulnerable. His honesty exposes him, his generosity weakens him, his mercy emboldens rivals. He becomes predictable, easy to read, easy to manipulate, and once predictable, he is no longer feared.
The cunning ruler avoids this trap by mastering appearances. He knows that generosity should be displayed only when it strengthens his rule, that mercy should be granted only when it secures loyalty, and that justice should be proclaimed even when cruelty is being carried out behind closed doors. In this way, the mask does not simply hide the truth, it becomes a weapon, disarming suspicion and buying trust, even as the prince consolidates his power. History is filled with leaders who thrived through this duality. They were actors as much as rulers, cloaking ambition in virtue so that the masses would not rebel. Their true selves remained hidden, seen only in the decisions that secured their thrones. This is the paradox Machiavelli revealed. Morality destroys the man who clings to it sincerely, but it empowers the man who wears it as theater. The crowd does not demand genuine virtue. They only demand the comfort of believing it exists. The ruler who gives them that illusion can act with ruthless freedom, all while being praised as just, merciful, and noble.
9. The liberation beyond conscience. To abandon the prison of a clear conscience is not to descend into chaos, it is to awaken to reality. The man unshackled from moral chains sees the world as it truly is, a place of struggle, ambition, and survival, where virtue is a luxury few can afford and indecision is fatal. He understands that morality is not an absolute law, but a tool, not a cage, but a weapon, and that the men who allow guilt to govern them surrender the advantage that makes leaders strong. Free from the torment of imagined sin, he can act decisively, without hesitation, without fear of judgment, and without allowing the opinions of the weak to dictate his choices. This liberation brings clarity. Every decision, every act, every calculated betrayal or harsh punishment is measured not by what is right in some abstract sense, but by its effectiveness in securing power, survival, and legacy. He learns to weigh outcomes, to anticipate consequences, to strike at precisely the moment that guarantees success. The conscience-bound man trembles at the thought of moral compromise, while the liberated ruler wields the same actions as instruments of mastery. Where others see guilt and remorse, he sees strategy. Where others see sin, he sees opportunity. In casting off the weight of conscience, he gains the most precious possession a man can have, freedom of action. Yet this liberation is not reckless. The man free from guilt is not a tyrant without foresight. He is a master of timing, perception, and subtlety. He knows when to show mercy and when to strike, when to inspire loyalty and when to instill fear. His conscience no longer hinders him. Instead, it becomes a distant echo, a faint warning he hears but does not obey. By stepping outside the moral rules that govern ordinary men, he achieves a clarity of purpose impossible for those who remain enslaved by guilt. The man who liberates himself from conscience becomes untouchable in his resolve, unstoppable in his ambition, and remembered not for innocence, but for greatness. The man with a clear conscience may rest peacefully at night, but he will wake to find himself powerless, forgotten, or crushed by those who were willing to bear the burden of guilt. The man without conscience may struggle with demons, but he will wake in palaces, command armies, and shape history. Machiavelli would say, "If you must choose, do not choose the prison of purity. Choose the dangerous freedom of power. For history does not remember who was innocent. It remembers who prevailed."